Friends, the most powerful office in Europe may be on the verge of collapse. 0:044 seconds. On March 11th, 2026, sources close to the European Commission began whispering a name that nobody in Brussels wanted to hear, and a word that nobody expected. 0:1616 seconds resignation. Ursula von der Leyen, the woman who has commanded the European Union through wars, economic crises, and 0:2323 seconds political earthquakes, is reportedly facing pressure so intense, so personal, 0:2929 seconds, and so coordinated that insiders are now openly asking whether she can survive it. No official letter has been 0:3636 seconds released. No press conference has been called, but the silence coming from the top of the European Commission is speaking louder than any announcement. 0:4444 seconds. Sever could. So, what is really happening behind closed doors in Brussels? And is Europe's most powerful seat genuinely 0:5151 seconds about to become vacant? To understand why these resignation rumors are shaking the entire European political establishment, you first need to 1:001 minute understand exactly who Ursula von der Leyen is, what she built, and why so many powerful people now want to see 1:071 minute 7 seconds her gone. Ursula von der Leyen did not stumble into the presidency of the European Commission by accident. She was 1:141 minute 14 seconds appointed in 2019 after a career that took her through the German government, where she served as Minister of Defense under Chancellor Angela Merkel. She was 1:231 minute 23 seconds, not the most expected choice for the Commission presidency. In fact, her appointment was controversial from the beginning. The European Parliament 1:311 minute 31 seconds barely confirmed her with a margin of just 9 votes. 9 votes out of 751 1:381 minute 38 seconds members. That razor-thin confirmation should have been a warning that her hold on European power was never going to be 1:451 minute 45 seconds comfortable, and that the moment she stumbled, her enemies would be ready. 1:491 minute 49 seconds. But von der Leyen did not stumble, at least not immediately. In her first year, she launched the European Green Deal, one of the most ambitious climate 1:581 minute 58 seconds policy frameworks in the world. She oversaw the EU's response to the CO-19 pandemic, coordinating a continent-wide 2 to 62 minutes, 6 seconds vaccine procurement strategy that, despite early criticism, eventually delivered hundreds of millions of doses across member states. When Russia 2:142 minutes 14 seconds invaded Ukraine in February 2022, she was at the center of coordinating European sanctions against Moscow. 2:212 minutes 21 seconds, freezing hundreds of billions of euros in Russian sovereign assets, and positioning the EU as a unified 2:282 minutes 28 seconds. Geopolitical actor in a way that many thought was impossible. For a period, 2 minutes and 33 seconds, von der Leyen looked untouchable. She looked like the kind of leader Europe had always needed but rarely found. Then 2:400. 2 minutes, 40 seconds came her second term, and everything began to change. Von der Leyen was reappointed as Commission President in 2024, again with a narrow majority, and 492 minutes, 49 seconds from the very beginning of her second term. The political climate in Europe had shifted in ways that made her position significantly harder to defend. 2:582 minutes, 58 seconds. The political right was gaining ground across the continent. Giorgia Meloni had consolidated her grip on Italy and was now one of the most influential 3:063 minutes, 6 seconds voices in European conservative politics. Viktor Orban in Hungary had spent years building a network of nationalist alliances that openly challenged the Commission's authority. 3:173 minutes, 17 seconds. And in Germany, the economic engine of Europe, the political landscape had been upended. Friedrich Merz had taken power 3:243 minutes, 24 seconds as chancellor, bringing with him a harder line on economic policy. 3:293 minutes, 29 seconds migration, and Germany's role within the European framework. These were not minor adjustments. These were structural shifts in the balance of European power. 3:383 minutes, 38 seconds, and von der Leyen, who had built her authority on a version of European unity that depended on centrist consensus, 3:453 minutes, 45 seconds, suddenly found that consensus crumbling beneath her. The first major fault line to crack open was Ukraine, specifically 3:533 minutes, 53 seconds, the question of what to do with the frozen Russian assets. After Russia's invasion, the EU had frozen 3 to 593 minutes, 59 seconds, approximately 300 billion euros in Russian sovereign assets held in European financial institutions. The 4 to 64 minutes, 6 seconds, majority of them sitting in Euroclear, a Belgian-based financial clearinghouse. The debate over how to use those assets has been one of the 4:154 minutes, 15 seconds most legally and politically complicated questions in recent European history. 4:204 minutes, 20 seconds Van der Leyen's commission had pushed for using the profits from those frozen assets to fund military and reconstruction support for Ukraine. But 4:294 minutes, 29 seconds, a growing faction within European leadership began pushing for something more aggressive. The direct transfer or seizure of the principal assets 4:384 minutes, 38 seconds themselves, not just the profits. This proposal alarmed legal experts, 4:434 minutes, 43 seconds financial institutions, and several member state governments who argued it would set a dangerous precedent, 4:494 minutes, 49 seconds potentially destabilize the euro status as a global reserve currency and expose European financial institutions to 4:564 minutes, 56 seconds massive legal liability. Mayers, despite his strong rhetorical support for Ukraine, was among those who raised 5:045 minutes. 4 seconds, serious questions about the legal and financial risks of such a move. 5:085 minutes. 8 seconds, Germany's position on this issue carried enormous weight. Germany is the largest economy in the Eurozone, and any policy 5:165 minutes. 16 seconds, that threatens the stability of the euro or investor confidence in European financial institutions is a policy that Berlin will resist. Regardless of which 5:255 minutes, 25 seconds party holds the chancellery. This disagreement over Russian assets was not simply a policy debate. It was a test of authority. Van der Leyen had staked 5:345 minutes, 34 seconds. Significant political capital on the EU's Ukraine strategy. If her own member states, and particularly Germany, began 5:425 minutes, 42 seconds publicly breaking with her approach, it sent a signal across Brussels that the Commission President no longer had the political backing to enforce her agenda. 5:525 minutes, 52 seconds. At the same time, the economic picture inside the EU was deteriorating in ways that made governance even harder. 5:595 minutes, 59 seconds, Germany had entered a prolonged period of economic difficulty. Industrial output was down. Energy costs, which had spiked dramatically after Russia cut gas 6:086 minutes, 8-second supplies to Europe, had restructured the cost base for German manufacturing in ways that were proving very difficult to reverse. German companies were 6 to 176 minutes, 17 seconds relocating production. Investment was slowing. The German economy, which had been the financial backbone of European stability for decades, was 6 to 256 minutes, 25 seconds underperforming, and German politicians were growing impatient with European Commission policies they believed were making the problem worse rather than 6:346 minutes, 34 seconds better. Mance arrived in the Chancellery with an agenda. He wanted faster, more aggressive industrial policy. He wanted 6:416 minutes, 41 seconds, a recalibration of the EU's regulatory framework, particularly around the Green Deal, which German industrialists had 6:486 minutes, 48 seconds long, argued was placing European manufacturers at a competitive disadvantage relative to American, and 6:556 minutes, 55 seconds Chinese rivals. He wanted Brussels to move quickly, to be decisive, and to prioritize economic competitiveness. 7:037 minutes, 3 seconds Van der Leyen's commission, in his view, was moving too slowly and was too captured by the bureaucratic instincts of the 7 to 107 minutes, 10 seconds, European center left. And then from the south came Meloni. Giorgia Meloni's relationship with Van der Leyen had always 7:177 minutes, 17 seconds been complex. On the surface, they had maintained a working relationship. 7:227 minutes, 22 seconds. Meloni needed EU funding for Italy, and Van der Leyen needed Italian cooperation on migration policy. But beneath that, 7:307 minutes, 30-second surface, the ideological distance between them was vast. Meloni's political movement was built on the argument that Brussels had accumulated 7 to 397 minutes, 39 seconds too much power, that national governments had surrendered too much sovereignty to unelected commission officials, and that the European project 477 minutes, 47 seconds needed to be fundamentally restructured to put member states back in control. 527 minutes, 52 seconds. These were not abstract philosophical differences. They were direct challenges to the institutional model that van der Leyen represented and depended 8:008 minutes upon. By early 2026, Meloni had moved from managing her relationship with the Commission to actively shaping an 8:088 minutes, 8 seconds alternative vision of European governance, one that found sympathetic ears in Warsaw, Vienna, and Budapest. 8 minutes and 58 seconds, 15 seconds. The emerging nationalist conservative bloc within the EU was no longer simply an opposition force. It was beginning to 8:238 minutes, 23 seconds look like an alternative government in waiting, and van der Leyen caught between a weakened German government demanding economic reform, a resurgent European right demanding institutional reform. 8:348 minutes, 34 seconds, and a war in Ukraine demanding financial and military commitments that were straining every member state's budget was being pulled in directions that no 8:438 minutes, 43 seconds single leader could simultaneously satisfy. So, when the rumors began circulating on March 11th, 2026, rumors 8:508 minutes, 50 seconds of private conversations, of resignation letters being drafted, of senior commission officials being asked to prepare contingency plans, they did not 9:009 minutes come from nowhere. They came from the accumulated weight of 2 years of political erosion. And the question that 9:069 minutes, 6 seconds, every European capital is now asking is not simply whether van der Leyen will resign. The question is who engineered 9:149 minutes, 14 seconds this moment, and what do they want to replace her with? The rumors did not simply appear overnight. They were the 9:219 minutes, 21 seconds, product of a carefully constructed political pressure campaign, one that had been building for months inside the corridors of Brussels, Berlin, and Rome. 9:309 minutes, 30 seconds. And to understand who was truly behind this moment, you need to follow the chain of events that led Europe's most powerful leaders to the conclusion that 9:399 minutes, 39 seconds, van der Leyen had become a liability rather than an asset. Friedrich Marx was the first to move. In the weeks leading up 9:469 minutes, 46 seconds to March 11th, 2026, the German Chancellor had been increasingly vocal in his criticism of the European Commission's handling of economic 9:549 minutes, 54 seconds policy. In public, his language remained diplomatic. In private, according to sources familiar with the conversations, 10:0110 minutes, 1 second Mayers had made clear to his closest allies that he believed the Commission under van der Leyen had become structurally incapable of delivering the kind of 10 to 10 minutes, 10 seconds rapid decisive economic reform that Germany and by extension Europe urgently needed. Germany was not simply 10 to 10 minutes, 17 seconds experiencing a slow economic patch. It was undergoing a fundamental industrial transformation. And the policies coming 10 minutes, 25 seconds out of Brussels were, in Merit's assessment, accelerating decline rather than reversing it. The Green Deal regulations, the carbon border 10:3310 minutes, 33 seconds adjustment mechanisms, the digital regulatory frameworks, all of them, in the view of Berlin's new leadership, were adding cost and complexity to European 10:4210 minutes, 42 seconds business at precisely the moment when European business needed relief and flexibility. Merz had also grown frustrated with what he saw as 10:5110 minutes, 51 seconds, van der Leyen's tendency to make major strategic commitments, particularly around Ukraine, without fully consulting the member states, who would ultimately, 11 o'clock, 11 minutes, bear the financial consequences. The frozen Russian assets debate had exposed this tension sharply. The Commission had 11:0711 minutes, 7 seconds been pushing a framework that Germany's own legal and financial experts had flagged as deeply problematic. And yet, 11:1411 minutes, 14 seconds. Van der Leyen had continued to advance the proposal, confident in her own authority and in the support of smaller member 11 Cologne. 2,111 minutes, 21 seconds states who had less financial exposure than Berlin. For Merz, this was not acceptable governance. This was a commission president acting as though 11:2911 minutes, 29 seconds she led a federal government, when in reality, She led an institution that derived every gram of its legitimacy from the consent of the member states. 11:38, 11 minutes, 38 seconds. Maloney's pressure came from a different direction but arrived at the same destination. Where May's frustration was primarily economic and procedural, 11:47, 11 minutes, 47 seconds. Maloney was ideological and structural. 11:50, 11 minutes, 50 seconds. She had spent years arguing that the European Commission had expanded its authority far beyond what the founding treaties intended, that it had 11:5711 minutes, 57 seconds, transformed itself from a technocratic coordinating body into a political actor with its own agenda, its own ideology, 12:0512 minutes, 5 seconds, and its own set of priorities that frequently overrode the democratic choices of national electorates. The Commission's handling of Hungary, and 12:1312 minutes, 13 seconds Poland, where EU funding had been withheld over rule of law disputes, had become a rallying point for the European nationalist right. Maloney had used 12:2212 minutes, 22 seconds. These cases to build a narrative that Brussels under van der Leyen was not a neutral arbiter of European rules, but a 12:2912 minutes, 29 seconds politically motivated institution that punished governments it disagreed with and rewarded those that fell in line. By 12:36, 12 minutes, 36 seconds early, 2026, this narrative had gained significant traction beyond the traditional nationalist base. Even centrist governments that had previously 12:45, 12 minutes, 45 seconds been reliable supporters of Commission authority were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the balance of power between Brussels and 12:5312 minutes, 53 seconds national capitals. The European Parliament elections of 2024 had shifted the political center of gravity 13:0013 minutes rightward across the continent. And van der Leyen, despite having secured her second term with the support of center-right parties, was finding it 13:0813 minutes, 8 seconds, increasingly difficult to hold together a governing coalition inside the parliament that could pass her legislative agenda. The isolation was 13:1713 minutes, 17 seconds becoming visible. Key votes in the European Parliament were passing with smaller and smaller majorities. Commission proposals were being amended, 13:2513 minutes, 25 seconds delayed, or sent back for revision with greater frequency. The legislative machine that van der Leyen had used so effectively in her first term was 13:3413 minutes, 34 seconds grinding slower, and the political signals coming from member state capitals were growing more hostile by the week. Then came the international 13:4213 minutes, 42 seconds dimension, and this is where the pressure on van der Leyen became truly extraordinary. The return of Donald Trump to the White House in January 2025, 13:5113 minutes, 51 seconds, had fundamentally altered the transatlantic relationship. Trump had made clear repeatedly and publicly that he viewed the European Union as a trade 14 minutes adversary, that he had little interest in maintaining the security commitments that had underpinned NATO for decades, 14 minutes and 71 seconds, 7 seconds, and that his administration intended to deal with European nations bilaterally rather than through the Commission. This was a direct challenge to the entire 14:1514 minutes, 15 seconds model of European integration. The idea that Europe spoke with one voice on trade, security, and foreign policy 14 minutes, 23 seconds through Brussels. Von der Leyen had attempted to engage with the Trump administration, but the results had been humiliating. Her efforts to establish a 314 minutes, 31 seconds working relationship with Washington had been publicly rebuffed. Trump had shown greater willingness to communicate directly with Maloney, with mayors, and 14 minutes, 39 seconds 7 with Orban than with the Commission president. The message was unmistakable. 14:44, 14 minutes, 44 seconds. Washington did not recognize van der Leyen as a peer. It recognized national leaders, and in doing so, it dramatically 14:52, 14 minutes, 52 seconds undermined the authority and relevance of the institution she led. This created an opening that Maloney and others were 14 minutes, 59 seconds quick to exploit. If Washington was bypassing Brussels and dealing directly with capitals, then the argument for 15:0615 minutes, 6 seconds strong centralized Commission authority became significantly weaker. Why should Italy or Germany or Poland surrender 15:1415 minutes, 14 seconds policy autonomy to a Commission that even the world's most powerful government refused to take seriously as a negotiating partner? The pressure from 15:23, 15 minutes, 23 seconds, all these directions: economic frustration from Berlin, ideological challenge from Rome, institutional 15 minutes, 30 seconds erosion from Washington converged into something more dangerous than any single political crisis. It created a crisis of 15 to 38 minutes and 15 seconds legitimacy. And a commission president who has lost legitimacy in the eyes of the continent's most powerful governments does not need to be formally removed. She simply becomes irrelevant. 1549, 15 minutes, 49 seconds. Her proposals ignored, her authority questioned, her coalition fractured beyond repair. Which brings us to the most critical question of this entire 15:5, 815 minutes, 58 second situation. The resignation rumors circulating on March 11th, 2026 may or may not reflect a genuine decision by 16 minutes and 71 seconds. 7 seconds van der Leyen herself. But whether she resigns voluntarily or is simply rendered politically powerless, the outcome for Europe could be identical. 16 minutes, 16 seconds. And if the most powerful seat in Brussels does become vacant, either formally or effectively, the battle to fill that vacuum will be unlike anything. 2,516 minutes, 25 seconds the European Union has seen since its founding. Because the people waiting in the wings are not interested in continuing van der Leyen's project. They 16:3316 minutes, 33 seconds want to rebuild it entirely. And not everyone agrees on what that rebuilding should look